chat was being crazy last time. I forgot. I should have fixed that. Okay. Welcome in. All right. Let me see if this is working. Working. Let's do this. Let's do some Streamlabs. Stream Elements. And figure out this this chat thing going on over here. Credits. Chat. Hey, what's going on with this, brah? What's going on with this, brah? Yeah, show message permanently. We're going to do that. Okay, so let's do that. Okay. This may work. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to delete that. We're going to add it back. All right, pardon me. That should work. We'll see. We're going to lock it down. Yes. So weird. Oh, it's working on here. That's good. Why not on here, though? Here's what we're going to do then. We're going to try to... Oh, sorry. Copy and paste this. Copy. Paste the reference. Okay, yeah, so I don't... whatever. thanks for bearing with me on the VOD and in real life. Okay. Now let's not touch that. Let's keep it going. Good. So, is what we've been doing mostly for the last week. We're going to read the book of Acts. We're going to get commentary on the book of Acts. And we're going to do a devotional beforehand. But first, let us remind ourselves what to do today. And we'll recite the Shema. And it goes something like this. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha bechol levavcha uvechol nafshecha uvechol meodecha. Hallelujah. It means you must, commanding us to love the Lord our God with our whole mind, our whole being, and all of our strength. Very hard thing to do. It says, listen, Israel, hear. The Lord is our God. The Lord is one. He is united. He is echad. He is, one. Let us go about our day with that on our mind. Please, Lord, keep that on our mind. Okay, so the other thing we've been doing is this. Charles Spurgeon's Faith Checkbook. I saw it on here last week. It's a cool thing, so we're gonna go on this April Fool's. I'm not gonna do any April Fool's stuff, so. The King's Highway is what this one's called. Whoa, brah. Whoa. Okay, that's cool, man. There's different font types for Hebrew too? Whoa. Okay, guys, it's tripping me out. Anyway. King's Highway, based on Isaiah 35:8. The wayfaring men, though fools, shall not err therein. Context. A thoroughfare will be there. It will be called the way of holiness. The unclean will not travel on it. It is reserved for those who authorize to use it. Fools will not stray into it. Let's see what he's talking about. What is the context? Let's go in there. I want to look. He's talking about messianic. The lambs will leap like deer. The mute will shout for joy. The water will flow in desert streams in the wilderness. Dry soil will become pool of water. The parched ground, springs of water. Where jackals once lived and sprawling out, grass, reeds, and papyrus will grow. A thoroughfare will be there. What does it mean by thoroughfare? A highway. Maslol. Highway. Masal? What is that from? Salal, to rise up, to cast out, to extol, to make plain. Okay. A highway will be there. It will be called the way of holiness. The unclean will not travel on it. It's reserved for those authorized to use it. Fools will not stray into it. No lion will be there. No ferocious wild animal will be on it. They will not be found there. Those delivered from bondage will travel on it. Those whom the Lord has ransomed will return that way. They will enter Zion with a happy shout. Unending joy will crown them. Happiness and joy will overwhelm them. Grief and suffering will disappear. This is what many people consider to be the second Exodus. See if we can find it. Doesn't talk about Egypt here, but a lot of people say there's plenty of verses in Isaiah, plenty of whole sections that talk about in that day no one will remember the former Exodus for the new Exodus that the Lord will have is gonna be what everybody remembers. So the Scripture talks about a second Exodus. What that means, what the context of that means, is a good question. Could be an actual exodus of people from all over the world to Zion. I don't think it's. Yeah, I'm not going to make it allegorical because that's too easy. Anyway. The way of holiness is so straight and plain that the simplest minds cannot go astray if they constantly follow it. The worldly wise may have twists and turns, and yet they make terrible blunders and generally miss their end. Worldly policy is a poor, short-sighting thing. And when men choose it as their road, it leads them over dark mountains. Gracious minds know better than to do as the Lord bids them. No better. Gracious minds know no better than to do what the Lord bids them. But this keeps them in the king's highway and under royal protection. That's what we were reading. Let the reader never for a moment attempt to help himself out of a difficulty by a falsehood or by a questionable act. But let him keep in the middle of the high road of truth and integrity, and he will be following the best possible course. In our lives, we must never practice circular sailing, nor dream of shuffling, but be just and fear not. Follow Jesus and heed no evil consequences. If the worst of ills could be avoided by wrongdoing, we should, in the very attempt, have fallen into evil worse than any other ill could be. Let me read that again. If the worst of ills could be avoided by wrongdoing, we should, in the very attempt, have fallen into an evil worse than any other ill could be. In other words, we think it's the worst ill, and we can avoid it by doing wrongdoing, but by doing wrongdoing to avoid the ill, we're falling into some evil even worse than any other ill. That's a good point. God, that's such on point for me and a lot of things that we do nowadays. God must be the best way. Follow it, though men think you a fool, and you will be truly wise. I don't know how many times I've been tempted to and actually have try to avoid things that I think are bad by doing things that are questionable or false or just wrong in the first wrongdoing, period. It's tricky because our worldly minds want to be like, oh, just do this, take this shortcut, or do this will make it feel better or distract you or whatever it is. And nope, it made it worse. It compounded. I mean, this is literally two wrongs don't make a right, guys. That's what we learned when we were 2 years old, right? Okay, 4 years old. When we could actually understand more about that. Okay. Okay, today is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Hallelujah. Okay. Okay. We'll go ahead and start. So we're on verse 8 through 10. I mean, I would like to leave that up, but I could probably do this. Let's do this. Baby, do you want to be mine? Acts 2. I like this screen better. Oh my gosh, this is cool. Why did I not do this before? Okay, 8 through 10. 8 through 11. Eight through 10, or 8 through 11. Chapter 2. And how is it that we each heard them in our own language? This is after kind of the coming of the Spirit on the disciples. The apostles, possibly more. It doesn't specify who. It could be the 12. It could be 120. It could be 500. Like we don't know how many people this happened to necessarily, but likely smaller numbers. And they went outside and started speaking to people who were there from the diaspora, who were Jews who came into Jerusalem for the festival of Shavuot, or Pentecost as we know it. Celebrates the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. That's what we got done reading before. Kind of how the wind and the fire and all these different ways of thinking about the giving of Torah on Mount Sinai was celebrated during Shavuot. They recalled it. And then this is like a spiritual new covenant giving of the Torah, giving of the law on our hearts kind of experience that Luke's trying to tell us. And how is it? Okay, we'll go and do this. And how is it that each here? Sorry, I gotta check 1 2 check 1 2. Just because sometimes I have more crackly audio and haven't had anybody in here to tell me otherwise. So hold on 1 sec. All right, we're good to go. So, hey, Christian Baker, what's going on? We're doing our Acts study right now. We're doing we're on verse 8 through 11 on Acts 2. I have it highlighted there. That's the book we're reading out of. Welcome, welcome. Good. I'm glad. I just double checked it, so I knew there was no crackling, so we're good. And how is it that each of them here in our own, how is it that each of them in our own language to which we were born? Parthians and Medes and Elamites and residents of Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt and districts of Libya around Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs, and we hear them in our own tongue speaking of the mighty deeds of God. So this is going to be kind of like a little history lesson right here. I'll try to get through it. The origins of the Jewish diaspora go back to the Babylonian exile, 597 to 586 BCE. Although the first dispersion was to Egypt, contemporary sources reflect the opinion that the 10 tribes in the Kingdom of Israel never returned from Assyrian exile, and even the returns of the tribes of Benjamin and Judah, the Kingdom of Judah, could hardly have been total. Okay. Although Babylon is mentioned in Ezra's home, and Nehemiah served in the position of privilege and responsibility as cupbearer to Artaxerxes, Nehemiah 1 and 11 says that. No specific evidence exists concerning the status of the Jewish community in Babylon following the Achaemenides' permission from the exiles to return. Oh, okay. No specific evidence exists concerning the status of the Jewish community in Babylon following the permission from the exiles to return home. Babylon itself is incorporated into the Parthian kingdom by 120 BC. Originally a nomadic tribe known as the Parni, and the Parthians took their name from the region east and north of Caspian, where they settled. Extant information on the Jewish community during the later period is also sparse. Josephus records the immigration to the land of Israel of a Babylonian Jew by the name of Zamaris during Herod's reign, who appears to have been a Babylonian Jewish noble, learned in the Parthian art of war. Since the Talmud also refers to Jews dressed like aristocrats in the tall hat characteristic of Parthian nobility, and with the usual retinue of horses and mules, it may be inferred that the upper class of the assimilated aristocracy existed, simultaneously familiar with the Parthian culture and the high standings within the Jewish community, as well as farmers and tradesmen. Many references to the Babylonian pilgrimage exist prior to 70 CE. Numerous prominent figures and families during the period of being Babylonian origin include the high priest Ananel, Hillel, Arhaya, and Judah Barthiar. Babylonian practices are frequently mentioned in the Mishnah, which is a Jewish oral writing of oral tradition. The conversion of the royal house of Adiabin, whose kingdom stretched from Armenia to the north of Atropatene in the east, and the establishment of the semi-independent Jewish state of Asinias, constituted two of the most important events in history of the Babylonian community. According to the temporary accounts, the Babylonian Jewish community numbered in the tens of thousands during the Roman period. The larger Babylonian diaspora was the only community which lay outside the sphere of Hellenistic and/or Roman political rule during the greater part of the period under discussion. It has thus developed its own form of life, which exerted an enormous influence on later Jewish history. The Medes were an Indo-Iranian people described in the biblical accounts as the descendants of Noah's son Japheth. First mentioned in the historical inscriptions in the 9th century Assyrian kings, Media was annexed to Assyria in the 8th century BCE. While it was incorporated into two Persian states following its absorption into the Persian Empire in 550 BC, it continued to occupy a special portion, as reflected in the common biblical combination Persia and the Media and Persia. Exactly, the Media and Persia together is what it's referencing, and that is, The Assyrian deportation of Media to Media of Jews is recorded in 2 Kings and attested to in the apocryphal book of Tobit. Their continued presence also being adducible from various rabbinic texts. Adducible. Elam is listed in the table of nations under the sons of Shem, apparently being considered geographically part of Mesopotamia. In the prophecies against the nations in Isaiah and Jeremiah, it is described, together with Media, as one of the peoples of the north who would destroy Babylon. A region on the edge of the southwestern Iranian plateau, Elam is referred to as classical sources as Susenia. its capital city being Susa. Following the fall of the Assyrian Empire in 600, was incorporated into the Greater Kingdom of Media, and then into the Persian Empire when it became. Susa's rebuilding was so magnificent that its importance ranked second only. Okay, hold on a second. Here we go. This is better. Because there's just so much extra stuff that I don't really care about. That's fun history lessons, right? But although the first exiles in Mesopotamia were settled in the king's land as the king's land tenants, the Jewish community was gradually assimilated into society and culture, achieving economic and social status, including high-ranking positions within the Assyrian administration. The exiles were given the right to agricultural holdings as well as permitted to observe customs of the forefathers and enjoyed a certain measure of internal autonomy. The Roman province of Judea was established in 6 CE. That's so crazy. It's like right after Jesus was born. When Augustus removed Archelaus from the position as ethnarch of Judea, Samaria, and Idumea. Since Archelaus's territories were too small to warrant a creation of an independent province, they were annexed into the neighboring province of Syria, whose governor had supervised Judean affairs even during Herod's reign. At the same time, the province's administration division continued to follow the Herodian system. Judea proper was divided into 11 toparchies, which Josephus enumerates as Jerusalem, Gophna. Okay, there's a bunch that you don't need to know that. The toparchies appear to have followed the division of the country according to the 24 priestly courses, although the latter were not confined to Judea, but covered the whole land of Israel. While most priests apparently lived in Judea, they did not by any means all reside in Jerusalem. Zechariah lived in the hill country of Judea. Matthias dwelt in Modi'in, and the Mishnah rules that wherever a priest resides, he must receive the heave offering for the cities of Judea. Although Jerusalem served as Judea's permanent administrative capital, as well as the Idumea, as that of Idumea, its control over the whole country ceased when it became a Roman province, whereupon the governor's seat was transferred to Caesarea. And then it says Caesarea was attached to Samaria, both territories being incorporated into the province of Judea. Jerusalem, nevertheless, remains the province's largest city and the chief focus of political, social, religious life due to the presence of both the temple and the Sanhedrin. A committee of the Sanhedrin seemed, in fact, to have been in charge of the finances, and 11 toparchies in the Jerusalem temple authorities in Judea were the least partly responsible for policing Judea. Yeah, we see that. If you've seen The Chosen, they do pretty well with that. The province is, as a whole, officially continued to be Judea up until the reign of Hadrian, and Galilee, Tiberias, and Tarchaean served as toparchical capitals. Okay, we'll just skip ahead a little bit. The term Asia designates various entities, contemporary literature, and inscriptions. Strabo regards continental Asia as bound by the Nile in Europe in the west and India in the east, and in the special sense of the term, the western peninsula of modern Turkey, Asia Minor. In contrast to both these senses, Asia can also refer to Roman province established in 133 BCE, which includes Phrygia and Mysia. The oldest usage and that which Luke appears to reflect here refers Asia to the Greek cities along the Aegean coast together with the territory adjacent to them. The Jewish community of Egypt formed the largest and most important diaspora center in the Roman Empire. The Jewish migration to Egypt referred to in Jeremiah is in fact the only dispersion during the period of the First Temple of which there is definite knowledge. One of the earliest settlements was the Jewish military colony on the island of Elephantine, which, according to the document dated 410 BCE, so before yeah, after the exile, but before, yeah, 410 BC, was founded by Cambyses' conquest in 525 and maintained the important temple parallel to the one in Heliopolis, described by so and so. While the extent of the continuity from the Persian to Ptolemaic periods in Egypt remained unclear, the substantial Jewish immigration evidently took place in the early Hellenistic period, and under the Ptolemaic king, Jews were settled throughout Lower and Upper Egypt and served significant functions in social and political life. Despite its probable rhetorical exaggeration, Philo's figure put the number of Egyptian community at no less than 1 million Jews resident in Alexandria and the country from the slope of Libya to the boundaries of Ethiopia. The proximity of Egypt and Syria, including Phoenicia, to the land of Israel, meant that the former communities were particularly influenced by their Jewish population. The origin of Jewish presence in the Arabian Peninsula cannot be determined. The biblical term Arev appears to refer to nomads. Whether or not the actual Arab tribes ever existed is unknown, and Arabia itself is a Greek coinage. The earliest extent referred to Arabs alludes to a certain persons who supplied 1,000 camel riders to Ahab's coalition forces. The Mishnah mentions Jewish women from Arabia. The walled city of Taima and the kingdom of Dedan were regarded in biblical times as part of Edom. The latter was apparently followed by the Lyhian people, unknown in the Tanakh, although many foreigners, including Nabateans, Timanites, Greeks, and Jews resided in there, the capital of the former kingdom. The fact of Jewish dispersion is undisputed. According to Strabo, as quoted by Josephus, this people had already made its way into every city, and it is not easy to find any place in the habitable world which has not received this nation, and in which it has not made its power felt. Strabo's statement is echoed by Philo's estimation that the Jews, quote, attract and win the attention of all, of barbarians, of Greeks, of dwellers in the mainland and islands, of nations of the east and the west, Europe and Asia, of the whole inhabited world from end to end. There you go. What's up, Takuya? Sorry I didn't see you lurking. Loot. You're going to loot. It's okay. Good to see you. Lutkin. In Agrippa the First letter, the king describes the places to which the Jewish colonies had been sent according to the three categories, supplying in the process, as Luke does here, a table of nations specified by their relative distance from Jerusalem and Judea. A, the mainland subdivided, Egypt, Phoenicia, Syria, etc. B, the most highly esteemed islands. And C, the countries beyond the Euphrates, almost all. First Maccabees likewise witnesses the breadth and the autonomous nature of the Jewish diaspora communities. Quote, Lucius, consul of the Romans unto King Ptolemy, greetings, the Jews' ambassadors, our friends and confederates, came unto us to renew the old friendship and league. We thought it good, therefore, to write unto the kings and countries that they should do them, the Jews there, no harm, nor fight against them, their cities or countries, nor yet aid their enemies against them. If, therefore, there be a pestilent fellow that have fled from their countries unto you, deliver them to Simon the high priest, that they may be punished, that they may punish them according to their law. The same thing wrote to the Demetrius the king, and Attalus, and all these other rulers of Syria, Pergamum, Cappadocia, Parthia, and all the countries in the... Wow. So this is just part of a... Let me see. First Maccabees is talking about all this. Just like they're everywhere, guys. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of what we've been reading so far. Jewish people have been everywhere. The diaspora. Jewish responses to and interpretations of the diaspora were nevertheless diverse and varied. The Tanakh almost frequently associates dispersion with exile, perceiving the latter as a direct expression of God's judgment of Israel's sin and disobedience. At times, even in the advance of the latter's commission, or for the lack of faith. The ingathering of the people was conversely seen as a sign of God's faithfulness and mercy. Even when it was regarded as a punishment which brought hatred towards the dispersed, the exile could nonetheless still be perceived as God's will. Several writers bemoaning the fact that it gives the Gentiles occasion to profane God's character and name, perhaps particularly in response to the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, the sages speak of the Shekinah, God's glorious presence, going into exile with Israel, and compared the banishment for violating the covenant with Adam's expulsion from the Garden of Eden for transgressing God's command. That's interesting because we're talking about, what does it say? The Tanakh says that? The sages. I mean, that's what I'm thinking it means. 73. Yeah. Sages as in, in the oral writings, the writings of the oral tradition. That's weird, though, because nowadays they think that God's glory is still somewhat present where the old temple used to stand, and that's why the Western Wall is the most holy place in Judaism, because people go there to be closest to God's presence. But if the Shekinah, or God's glorious presence, went out into exile with Israel, that's interesting. At least that's what, if they're thinking that, I'm wondering where that division happened. Over the course of time, the diaspora came to represent a fact of life, and Jews voluntarily chose to live abroad when they could have returned to the land of Israel. Especially Babylonia and Rome, where the Jews were carried captive following Pompey's conquest of the land in 63 BCE. While Philo implies that the move outward could be occasioned by overpopulation, others were attracted by good conditions in other places. Hecataeus records that the Jews in Syria, quote, hearing of the Ptolemy Soter's kindliness and humanity, desired to accompany him to Egypt and to associate themselves with his realm, and that one of the chief priests of the Jews read to his friends all the advantages of immigration, for he had in writing the conditions attached to the settlement and political status. In Agrippa's alleged letter to Gaius the king asserts that Jerusalem is the, quote, mother city not of one country, Judea, but also of most of the others in virtue of the colonies sent out at diverse times. Such colonies could also represent Jewish civilian settlers who, having faithfully served foreign powers, were subsequently granted rights of citizenship in their territories. Jewish merchants and itinerant teachers such as Paul, Silas, and Barnabas clearly traveled from place to place and may have had settled outside the land permanently. Acts itself indicates that Jewish refugees frequently relocated to other parts of the empire. Josephus interprets Balaam's prediction in Numbers 23:9 to say that while the Jews were not few in number, in the future Israel's multitude shall find abode on islands and continents, more numerous even than the stars of heaven. Philo similarly asserts that, quote, settlers abroad and the inhabitants of other regions are not wrongdoers who deserve to be deprived of equal privileges, particularly if the nation has grown so populous that the single country cannot contain it. This positive evaluation of the diaspora coincides with the idea that the Jewish nation could be a source of benefit to others. And I shall scatter my people, this people, among the nations, that they may do good in the nations. An attitude which was implicit in some notion of Jewish proselytism. More frequently among the sages, the positive aspect of exile was drawn from the fact that the dispersion or assimilation into the surrounding nations guaranteed Israel's survival as a nation, and thus also the possibility of their ultimate return to the land. At the same time, Jerusalem remains the center of Jewish life throughout the world. The Jews of the diaspora consider themselves partners with the Jewish community in the land of Israel, sharing their joys and sorrows, most certainly their hopes of redemption. Luke's list of nationalities, or diaspora communities, reflects the three main groups. I can't speak it fluently. I can read it, and I can say I know how to pronounce Hebrew. but I studied Hebrew and Greek for about a year and a half for each. So I can make out certain things. I can, recite the Shema. I do that at the beginning of stream. Um, I can read Hebrew, I'm not the best at recognizing everything. So I'm definitely not fluent. And even if you're fluent in biblical Hebrew, it's still hard to be. Oh, yeah, that's cool. Cool. Yeah, I mean, it's good to be familiar. Hey, it's about the concepts. It's really about the concepts. It's about understanding what, even if you have a direct translation of a Hebrew word to English, sometimes it's not the same. So, like, real quick, we'll do this. Deuteronomy 4. It says Shema, hear, but here it's translated as listen. Why? Because it's command, and when in Hebrew, listen or hear means to hear and obey. So listen. You must love the Lord your God with your whole mind, your whole being, and all your strength. Your whole mind, right here, it's heart in Hebrew. Well, in Hebrew thought, it's kind of flipped. The heart is what we think of as the mind. Your whole being. Well, this is soul in Hebrew. Whole being. Why does it say whole being? Because soul isn't just some spiritual part of you. Soul is your entire being, including your physical body in Hebrew thought. And all your strength. You don't have a mind, Takuya. You don't have a mind. No mind, just a heart. Your volition, your will to do things. Yeah, because, okay, so one of the big points that this guy's making, and that I agree with, is it's not just a spiritual mission, it's a geographical spiritual mission. Geography is tied to spiritual affairs in the Bible. It is. Throughout the whole thing. As in Genesis and Jubilees, Luke puts Jerusalem at the center of the earth. You see the photo on the top of the of my book of Acts here, Jewish Roots of Acts. That's the photo. That's Jerusalem in the center. It's called the navel of the world. It's like the center of the world. Perhaps reflecting the dictum in Deuteronomy, which sets the boundaries of the people according to the numbers of the sons of Israel. Even though that can be translated also according to the sons of God. Most people think that that's a better translation, or better transcript, or so it's based on the Dead Sea Scrolls, because that's what they found in Dead Sea Scrolls. Later ones it says sons of Israel. Israel didn't exist during that time, so how could they be set as that sons? So people say, but it depends on your translation, on who takes what. Sons of Israel or sons of God? Sons of God can mean basically supernatural beings, supernatural deities created, but still still deities, still spiritual beings. There's so much history and science and history. Yeah, totally. I mean, if the New Testament, what we're reading right now, is based off the most accurate and well preserved, and in other words, if the documents of the letters and the writings in the New Testament aren't historically accurate and historically reliable, then no history is in the entire world. Because the history that we like to talk about Greece and Rome and these rulers and all these things, have way less evidence for historical validity than the New Testament. So that alone, it's literally a historical document. The similarities which Luke's account exhibits with the Table of Nations has prompted modern scholars to suggest that the traditional division of outreach in Acts, according to an ever-widening circle of Jews, Samaritans, and Gentiles, can alternatively be understood in terms of reaching towards outwards to Shem. Interesting. It seems evident that Luke's geographical horizon takes into central regard not merely the Jewish diaspora, but the ends of the earth as inclusive of all nations of the world. According to the Table of Nations tradition, these numbered 72, a figure which is clearly reflected in the Mishnaic interpretation of Shavuot at the festival of the giving of the Torah. That's where we're at. Pentecost. Shavuot is Pentecost. A figure which is clearly reflected. Yep, there we go. Luke would further seem to be directly associating Jesus' command to his disciples to witness to all nations, beginning with Jerusalem, and then to the remotest parts of the earth from every nation under heaven, with his sending out of the first 12 and then the 72, the first commission representing the 12 tribes, and the second the nations of the world. Oh, that's so cool. I never thought of it like that. Sending out the 12, representing first commission representing the 12 tribes, and then the second representing all the nations of the world. That's interesting. The eschatological, meaning end times stuff, eschatological significance of the Table of Nation tradition is also clearly brought out in such prophetic texts as Isaiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, as well as the War Scroll from Qumran. In this respect, the Table of Nations also represents linguistic tradition. The version in Genesis, which lists the nations according to their tongues, immediately precedes the account of the Tower of Babel, the whole goal of whose builders was to remain one people and one lip. It may, therefore, be the outpouring of God's Spirit at Shavuot on all flesh, represents a reversal of God's confusion of the tongues following the flood. For then I will give to the people a purified lip, and then all of them may call on my name on the name of the Lord to serve him shoulder to shoulder. That's Zephaniah 3:9. In this regard, Peter describes Cornelius's receipt of the Holy Spirit in terms of God's first concerning himself, about taking from among the Gentiles a people for his name. A portrayal which echoes passages in Isaiah. Quote, "Ho, every one who thirsts, come to the waters. I will pour out water on this thirsty land and streams on the dry ground. I will pour out my spirit on your offspring and my blessings on your descendants. This one will say, I am the Lord's, and the one will call in the name of Jacob, and another will write on his hand, belonging to the Lord, and will name Israel's name with honor." The distinction between Jews and proselytes in reference to Rome, may anticipate the importance which Rome assumed in the later chapters of Acts, as well as Paul's approach to the Gentiles. He's talking about right here, I'm pretty sure, both Jews and proselytes. Visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes. While perhaps not directly associated with current events in Rome, Luke's allusion to proselytes in connection with the city is interesting in light of the proselytizing activity on account of which successive Roman emperors banned Jews from the city. That's what's happening in Romans, the book of Romans. The Jews were banned, and then they got to come back for 7 years. So this is like Jews in charge of Messianic Jews in charge of everything, Gentiles coming alongside of them. Jews get kicked out, Gentiles in charge. Jews come back. How do we handle the hierarchical and the theological understandings? That's what Paul's doing in Romans. He's trying to delineate these things. The fact that the apostles are heard, quote, speaking of the mighty deeds of God in foreign languages is not itself particularly striking, given that the halakha sanctions the use of the vernacular in such prayers as the Shema, the Amidah, grace after meals, and various other public declarations and oaths. Although Luke does not directly report Peter and apostles' words, the crowd witnesses that they spoke of mighty deeds of God. The latter phrase recurs throughout the Tanakh in reference to the Exodus and God's numerous others interventions in Israel's history. In this respect, the apostles' utterances may have resembled the great Psalms, which recount God's care over all his works, his mercies, and his wonderful works on behalf of his people. That's Psalm 103 through 106 kind of do that. As well as the Shema and the Amidah. Amidah is one of the biggest prayers in Judaism and actually reflects kind of the pattern of the disciples' prayer or the Lord's Prayer that he teaches his disciples, as well as the Shema and the Amidah, the two central prayers of the post-biblical Judaism. What is this? Yeah, it's just resorting one of those blessings. Okay. So that's basically it for that. It also recalls God's promise in Jeremiah 33, "Call to me, and I will answer you, and I will tell you great and mighty things which you do not know." A verse which anticipates Peter's use of Joel later. Okay. See, that was kind of geeky because it was just about languages and stuff, right? Right here. We're going to move on to the next two. I think it's 12 and 13 yet. And they all continued in amazement and with great perplexity, saying to one another, "What does this mean?" But others were mocking and saying, "They're full of sweet wine." The question, "What does this mean?" would appear to represent the honest query to the significance of what was happening, in contrast to the mocking indulged in by others who attributed the phenomena to wine. Wine, known as the fruit of the vine or the red blood of the grapes, was served at all festival occasions to make man's heart glad, Psalms 104:15. It was considered by many to function as a nutriment, providing an important dietary liquid in a hot region characterized by scarce and frequently contaminated water. It is included in the 8 things listed beneficial in small amounts and harmful in excess, and others including, according to the different lists, work, sleep, wealth, business, traveling, cohabitation or movement, hot baths, and bloodletting. Sources speak of many of the 60 varieties of wine, the worst in quality, and then the most fiery Ammonite wine, which was said to incite lewdness. The land of Israel wine was so strong that it was usually drunk diluted with water, the recommended mixture being 2 parts of water to 1 part wine. When the term yanin is used, it is also on its own, it normally refers to such diluted red wine, just as the customary expression for pouring wine is to mix the cup. The sweet wine, mentioned here, was sometimes known as honeyed and spiced wine. Honey and pepper. Interesting. This wine was for drinking, in contrast to the mixture known a corrupted made of old, as opposed to one made with old wine, pure water, and balsam. The latter was used for medicinal purposes, especially after bathing, or it was an unguent given following circumcision. Okay. Although the current vintage is not yet matured, wine could be kept sweet all year round by placing it in a jar, sealed with the cork, and submerged in water for a month. The amount of wine which a person could tolerate before becoming intoxicated can be as little as a quarter log. That's 1/6 of an Italian liter. Whoa! That's some strong wine, they're right. Some people need to only drink a very small amount to feel it from the top of their head to the tip of their toes, is what they would say. Strong warning against the graphic descriptions of the effects of overindulgence are found throughout Jewish literature. In the case of Hannah, who, because she was speaking in her heart, only her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard, so Eli thought she was drunk, 1 Samuel, serves as the proof text of several halachot, or ways to walk out the commandments, oral teachings. Several oral teachings regarding the form of praying. A jurisdictional distinction is made between a man who is tipsy or funneled, yet still able to speak in the presence of the king, and another person, the man who is drunk or intoxicated or who's not able to collect his thoughts when suddenly confronted by a high personages whom he fears or reveres. Both are responsible for all business affairs and liabilities for punishment, unless the intoxicated man is drunk as drunk as Lot, when he then falls under the category of mentally ill. Although he who is tipsy may still pray, the drunkard's prayer is considered to be an abomination, or as one who serves idols. Wow. Similarly, a priest who had drunk a fourth of a log of wine was disqualified from temple service, while an Israelite who was disqualified on the same amount from giving judgment. Wow. They had some strict stuff with wine. I mean, with that strong a wine, it makes sense. The accusation that the apostles were drunk with sweet wine. What's up, Mordecus? The accusation that the apostles were drunk with sweet wine, with the latter's fortified status, carries serious religious implications. It was ruled that, quote, one who is suspected wrongfully of being drunk, when in fact he is praying, must clear himself. This ordinance derives from the interpretation of Hannah's reply to Eli's charge. But Hannah answered, saying, No, my lord. Thou art no lord, meaning that Shekinah and the Holy Spirit is not with you, in that you take the harsher and not the more lenient view of my conduct. Interesting. In this sense, the ceiling, yeah, good. I hope. And the sky too. And then you can also say cielo. Right? Heaven or sky? It sounds like ceiling. That'd be like I lost it. Oh, okay. Well, I hope you're building manager if you're not home. I think you're talking about work, right? Yeah, office. Oh, that's lame. Talk to your new manager, new building owner. In this sense, the shining of a person's face due to drinking and its glow due to the wisdom is notable. In the later Midrashic story, a heathen is said to have remarked on the observing Ar Yudah's Bar Ilel's face a glow that, quote, one of the three things is true of that man. Either he lends money upon interest, or he raises pigs, or he is drunk with wine. Ar Yudah rejected all three alternatives and replied that, indeed, the fourth cup of wine which I drink on the eve of Passover makes me feel, during the 49 days from Passover to Feast of Weeks, as though I had a tight cord around my head. When pressed for an explanation why his face was shining, he responded, It is instruction in Torah which makes my face shine, as it is written, a man's wisdom makes his face to shine. Interesting. So they would say shining a face doesn't mean I'm drunk. I could just be full of wisdom here. That's a good excuse. Paul later uses the metaphor of being filled with wine as an analogy for being filled with the Spirit. Basically as a counterpoint. Do not get drunk with wine, for that is dissipation, but be filled with the Holy Spirit. Although merely speculative, it is possible that the tongues of fire which fell upon the apostles and disciples had left a glow on their countenance. Interesting. I never heard that. Perhaps in a similar fashion to the way in which the Midrash in Exodus 24:7 describes the glory which formed a halo of a crown on the heads of the Israelites when they proclaimed, we will do and obey. That's what we talked about before. That is cool. It fell through. Okay. Yeah, no, yeah. Yeah, seriously. It's a big loan. But this is something that's cool because within the oral tradition, they said that God's glory formed a halo or crown around these people's heads. Fiery, glowing crown over their heads. In the oral tradition, they said that's what happened at Mount Sinai when the Torah was given. So the tongues of fire, that's an interesting connection. When the Israelites gave precedent to the we will do over we will hearken, 600,000 ministering angels came and set 2 crowns upon each of the man of Israel, one as a reward for we will do and the other as a reward for we will hearken. That's what it says in the oral tradition. Significantly, Peter and the other apostles are not accused of being goets or prophets of revolution, nor did their words stir up the fervor and uproar which followed after Stephen's trial and Paul's visit to Jerusalem. Rather, their exhibition of an exact knowledge of the law and a remarkable interpretive grasp of Scripture aroused astonishment. In this respect, Peter's speech not only represents a possible element of self-defense in the halakhic sense, in the oral tradition sense, in the Jewish tradition sense, but also extends to promise of the gift of the Holy Spirit to those who themselves accuse him of being drunk. Yeah. Okay, this is where we get into more, a little more. Verse 14 alone. But Peter, if my tongue was on fire, I'm sure I'd have a face would be, no doubt. Go eat a ghost chili pepper. See how that works, exactly. But Peter, taking his stand with the 11, raised his voice and declared to them, Men of Judea, and all who live in Jerusalem, let it be known to you and give heed to my words. The aorist verb, standing up, aorist is like the background, kind of like main focus of the verbs in Greek. Aorist is a tense in Greek verbs. It signifies Peter either stood up or he took his stand. Interesting. Luke gives no further indication of the location of the events, failing even to indicate precisely how communication with the crowd was established. Jerusalem, and specifically the temple court, served as the platform for sages, thinkers, and prophets come to the city for the feast who took the opportunity to address the crowds. The fact that Peter raised his voice may simply mean that he was the one to speak rather than indicating a need to make his voice carry. Although Peter and the apostles certainly knew the diaspora Jews were present in large numbers, Peter addresses the crowd as locals. Men of Jerusalem, right? Yeah. You men of Judea. In this respect, the expression you men of Judea may be better interpreted as Jews rather than men of Judea. Jewish men. It could be Jewish men, exactly. Andres Euhedoi. Men of Judea, Jewish men. I can see how that's it. As in verse 22, when Peter uses the biblical men of Israel as an alternative. The designation emphasizes his identification with the Jewish community at large, with the right to speak directly and truthfully to his brethren. This usage is reflected in the address made by the Jews in Jerusalem or to the brethren in Egypt. Quote, to the brethren, to the Jews in Egypt, greetings, the brethren, the Jews in Jerusalem, the county of Judea, good peace. That's for 2 Maccabees. Interesting. Hebrew speakers commonly referred to Jews as Israel, in contrast to Yehudoi, used by the Greek speakers, employed by Aramaic speakers. Or the other, In Hebrew literary works, Jews also designate themselves as Israel, Bnei Yisrael, while non-Jews refer to themselves as Aramaicized. Oh, Aramicized. Gotcha. While non-Jews refer to themselves with the Aramicized Yehudain. Interesting. Luke normally designates Jews by the term Yehudoi, while Peter, Paul, and Gamaliel address the audience as Israel. The term brethren conveys a sense of solidarity with the people, community, and nation. On hearing the news of the death of the Jewish martyrs, for example, the people rent their garments and exclaimed, our brother Israelites, our brethren, hearken to us. Okay. Verse 15, for these men are not drunk as you suppose. For it is only the third hour of the day. Yeah, this isn't long because this is going to go over the third hour. The rumor among the crowd that the apostles and disciples were drunk evidently reaches Peter's ears, whereupon he uses it as a springboard to explain the significance of the event taking place. The reference to the third hour, 9 o'clock in the morning, reflects the Mishnaic division of the day from dusk to dawn into 12 units, summer hours being slightly longer with winter hours than winter hours. In a Mishnaic discussion over the time up until when the morning Shema may be said, Rabbi Joshua states, quote, until the third hour, for so it is the way of the king to rise up at the third hour. In other words, the royalty could afford the luxury of allowing themselves to rise late in the day. The outpouring of the Spirit on the apostles and disciples had therefore taken place very early in the morning, suggesting that they had arisen around dawn to pray. The question of whether the community was staying together in the same place cannot be conclusively determined from this verse. Okay. See how slow it's a slow moving thing, but it's in depth, which is the fun part. Wow, this part didn't have too much. So 16 through 21. All of that, wow. I like this setup better too, where you can see the book of Acts and then you can also see the Blue Letter Bible, kind of read along. I like it. But this is what was spoken of through the prophet Joel. Quote, and it shall be in your days, God says, that I will pour forth of my Spirit upon all mankind, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Even upon my bond servants, my bond slaves, both men and women, I will in those days pour forth my Spirit, and they shall prophesy. And I will grant wonders in the sky above, and signs in the earth beneath, blood and fire and vapor of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the great and glorious day of the Lord shall come. And it shall be that everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. Peter first explains the significance of the fact that the crowd has heard the apostles and disciples speaking each in his own or her own language. The verse from Joel, which he quotes specifically, relates to the eschatological outpouring of the Holy Spirit on all flesh, which refers to both men and women, and not only to prophets, and to Jews and Gentiles. Is known in the author of the book by his name. Joel is known as the author of the book by his name. Peter understands that Joel's prophecy is based upon Moses' wish that all the Lord's people were prophets and that the Lord would put his Spirit upon all of them. Such was an exposition given by Rabbi Tanhuma, son of our Rabbi Abba. Quote, the Holy One, blessed is he, said, in this world only a few individuals have prophesied, but in the world to come all Israel will be made prophets, as it says, and it shall come to pass afterwards that I will pour my Spirit upon all flesh, and the sons and daughters shall prophesy, your old men, etc. The same theme is echoed in the Midrashim. Quote, but in the time to come and the end times, when I will uproot the evil inclination from among you, as it is said, and I will take away the stony hearts from your flesh, I will restore my divine presence amongst you. When is this? For it is said, and it shall come to pass afterwards that I will pour my Spirit upon all flesh. And because I will cause my divine presence to rest upon you, all of you will merit the Torah, and you will dwell in peace with the world, as this said, and all thy children shall be taught of the Lord, and great shall be peace of thy children. So this was already in kind of oral ideas anyway. Oh, I found some of the information in my research on the topic. If wine in the Bible is alcoholic or not. Yes, I do believe that it's alcoholic, but I'm finding proof. Non-alcoholic grape juice wasn't created exactly till the 1800s. A guy named Louis Pasteur, because they found a chemical that takes out exactly. So I had a guy do a whole video on this. There are fields of grapes, made for wine, and the grapes will fall on the ground, and they will ferment on the ground. Inside the grape will ferment and become alcoholic, quick. So there's videos of monkeys. You can look it up. Videos of monkeys that'll come out into these fields, and they'll grab these grapes off the ground, and then you'll see them stumbling around later because they're drunk. because they literally are like eating fermented wine inside of grapes. That's how quick it happens. So, yeah, before the 1800s, there was no such thing. Like, all wine was alcoholic. All wine. And from what this is saying, they had some pretty strong wine. I mean, they said you could get intoxicated off of a sixth of an Italian liter. That's just a liter to us. But 1/6 of a liter? What is 30? 33 divided by 6 is 5.5. That's one glass of wine. One glass of wine to become intoxicated. To be like gone is what they said. So they watered it down because of how bad. So yeah, that's interesting, Takuya. Yeah. Let me see this. Come on. Okay, I guess I gotta look up his name. (2015), is this it? This might be it. Alcohol comments, possibly. In 2015, I think that's it. This is a guy I used to follow before I went to seminary. He's got some good stuff, but he can be a little fundamentalist, but he's still a good guy. Zach Bauer wine, alcohol comments. I would look at that because he says kind of the same thing. But yeah, cool. I'll look up Mike Winger. Peter's interpolation of verse 18, and they shall prophesy, indicates that he perceives what is happening itself as a form of prophesying. His own prophecy regarding the Gentiles. While prophetesses were known in the Bible period, Talmudic texts cite Sarah, Miriam, Deborah, Hannah, Abigail, Huldah, and Esther. Prophecy was generally a male domain. A midrash states that 48 prophets prophesied to Israel corresponding to the 48 Levitical cities of refuge, both the Levites and prophets being responsible for instruction in Torah. The small number is then referenced to the prophets whose prophecy served as an example for future generations. Romans 15:4. There were actually very many prophets, as it has been taught. Quote, many prophets arose from Israel, double the number double the number of Israelites who came out of Egypt. Only the prophecy which contained a lesson for future generation was written down, and that which did not contain such a lesson was not written. Rabbinic dicta reflects the widespread belief that the Second Temple period that prophecy ceased with the destruction of the first temple, in which God's name resided, and that when the last prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, died, the Holy Spirit departed from Israel. That's oral teachings right there. Thank you, Takuya, thank you. I'll do that too, since I'm already over here. I think this is the video. I think it's the video, eh? What? There we go. So we'll do that too. Oh, that's wrong. Whoopsie daisy. I thought I copied. Baby shark doo 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 doo. Baby shark doo doo. Just kidding. Oh no, it closed on me. What is happening? Okay, good. Okay, yeah. So, let us continue. In lieu, it was said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that, since the temple was destroyed, prophecy has been taken away from the prophets and given to the fools and children. Interestingly, this transfer of tasks did not seem to have included women, although in many other respects, women, minors, slaves, and imbeciles possess the same halachic status. Interesting. Okay. Do your thing, Takuya. Thanks for lurking. While God raised up kings, sages, and prophets from the heathen nations, just as he did for Israel, the Midrashists suggest that he communicates with the latter through indirect, incomplete, and distant communication. Quote, "The Holy One, blessed be he, reveals himself to the heathen nations of the world by the incomplete form of address, even as it is said, and the Lord called unto Balaam. Whereas the prophets of Israel, he revealed himself in the complete form of address, as it says, and the Lord called unto Moses." Oh, it's a different way of the verb. So that's what the vayikar is expressed denoting uncleanness. As it is said, that is not clean by that which changes by night. You find that the Holy One, blessed is he, appears to the heathen nation of the world only as one who comes from a distant land, even as it is said, they came from a far country, and only at night, at a time when men are separated from one another. Even when Gentiles are said to be present at the end of days, they are frequently considered to have become Israel's slaves. I acquired men servants and maid servants, Ecclesiastes 2:7. These are the heathen nations, as it is said, and also upon the servants and upon the handmaids in those days I will pour my spirit. Joel 2:28. In the messianic future they will become servants of Israel, as it is written in Isaiah, and the stranger shall stand and feed your flocks, and aliens shall be your plowmen and your vine dressers, Ecclesiastes, or Isaiah 61:5. That's interesting. Peter intuits in some form that Joel's prophecy concerning all flesh speaks not only of Israel, but also of all nations, and that Jesus' death and resurrection instituted the new covenant, which God was pleased to make with his people, and whereby he promised to remove man's heart of stone by pouring out the Holy Spirit. Also included the Gentiles on an equal basis. All right. Verse 22. Men of Israel. See, he said it again. Men of Israel. And he was saying men of Judea. So he's still talking about just Jewish people, even though there are people from all over the world, not just that live there, that are in the city at the time. Men of Israel, listen to the words. Listen to these words. Jesus the Nazarene, a man attested to you by God. A man attested to you by God with miracles and wonders and signs, which God's performed through him in your midst, just as you of yourself know. Peter addresses men of Israel, listen to my words, directly recalls the opening words of the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. This verse serves as one of the central tenets of Judaism, affirming God's unity. Peter's allusion to it, here, frames his speech in the context of God's covenant with his people on Mount Sinai when he gave them the commandments and statutes and judgments, Deuteronomy 6:1. Hear, O Israel, the statutes and the ordinances which I am speaking you today and in your hearing, that you may learn them and observe them carefully. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb, Deuteronomy 5:1. Here too, Peter interprets the present experiences in terms of giving the Torah at Sinai. Okay, so he's connecting it all. It's still being connected. I didn't think of it like that. I thought some of the signs and wonders happening or the major connections, but he's saying this totally makes sense. The phrase, these words, ha'ele hadavarim, I want to point that out too. Baby shark. Just kidding. Deuteronomy 6. The Shema, again, he might be going to the Shema. Listen, Israel. And then he literally says, and these words, and I'm commanding you today. And these words, that's interesting. These words, I'm commanding you today to be kept in mind, kept on your heart. I thought that was interesting because I don't know if he's going to make that connection, but that's the connection I thought of right away. If we're connecting to Shema. The phrase, these words, probably refers to the prophecy which Peter's just quoted, although it may be a point forward to his followers' speech. In either sense, Peter applies the scriptural passage to the current events in the type of pesher or interruption common in the Qumran literature. Peter appears to associate Joel's wonders in the sky above and signs on the earth below. I don't know how that happened. There we go. Lights are lights, I guess. I don't know. Specifically with the signs and wonders through which God attests Jesus' messiahship. The word signs not appearing in either of the Masoretic or Septuagintal texts, although it is perhaps implicit in the latter. Significantly, Peter's further addition of above to heaven and the below to earth recalls the division of Deuteronomy 30:12, which Paul reflects in Romans in his midrashic explanation of, whoever will call upon the Lord will be saved. The verse which Peter concludes here. The prophet interprets the proximity and accessibility of the Torah indicated in the passage in terms of the end days, when no one will need to be taught any longer, since God will write his covenant on his people's hearts. Quote, but this is the covenant which I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and on their hearts I will write it, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. And they shall not teach again every man his neighbor and each man his brother, saying, know the Lord, for all will know me from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord, for I will forgive them of their iniquity and their sin I will remember no more. Jeremiah 31:33-34. Hallelujah. In an excellent display of Torah skills and exegesis, Peter understands that the passage in Joel is directly linked to the expectation of a new covenant. He identifies this with Jesus' death and resurrection, so that people now call upon the name of the Lord. He will answer them directly, both collectively and individually. God provides signs as proof that he is sovereign and that what he has provided will surely occur. Although his signs and wonders cover his all deeds of power and deliverance, they primarily focus on his leading the people out of Egypt, quote, with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm and with great terror and signs and wonders. Deuteronomy 26:8. As with Moses before Pharaoh, Aaron's staff constituting proof of his appointment by God, the signs and wonders which men perform also confirm that they have been sent by God and are acting on his behalf. Jesus himself refers to his works as signs, which prove the divine authority invested in him as God's representative. Yeah, that's what he says. If you don't believe me, if you don't believe my words, believe my actions. Believe what the things I've done. Believe the miracles and signs and wonders that I'm doing. Don't take my word for it. Look at it. That's what Jesus says so many times. The Messiah's works repeat the signs and wonders of the deliverance from bondage in Egypt, and therefore constitute one of the proofs of his legitimacy. When John asks whether Jesus is the expected Redeemer, Jesus turns to John's attention to the healing from the bondage of sickness and sin which he has effected. Exactly. John the Baptist even says, "Are you the one?" Now, when John was in prison, he heard of the works of the Messiah. He sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the coming one, or shall we look for someone else?" And Jesus answered and said to him, "Go and report to John the things that you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, the leopards are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have gotten the gospel preached to them." I want to put on the side here something else I've heard about this. When Jesus talks about that, yes, he's talking about these signs and wonders are proof, but we have to also think about how people talk in code sometimes. Jesus is quoting a prophecy that also includes releasing of prisoners from being captive. And he deliberately leaves it out of this, quoting the verse to John the Baptist. It's also, somebody else also pointed out that might be Jesus' way of saying, in a coded way, "I am the Messiah. I've come to do these things. You already know that John baptized him and saw him come, the dove come down from." Of course, John knew he was the Messiah. It's a way of Jesus to tell him, "You're not getting out of jail, buddy. You are where you are. I've come to do these things, but it's kind of just a little coded message is a good way I've heard it's talked about." Signs were likewise significantly associated with the coming of the Messiah, which attested to his messianic role. Jesus castigates those who ask him for a sign of the final salvation, saying, "This generation is a wicked generation. It seeks a sign, and yet no sign shall be given to it but the sign of Jonah. For just as Jonah became a sign to the Ninevites, so shall the Son of Man be in this generation." While other prophets performed signs that demonstrates God's future purposes, Jesus himself was, quote, "appointed for the fall and rise of many in Israel, and for a sign to be opposed." Luke 2:34. As the book of Jubilees describes Enoch as being put in Eden, quote, "for a sign, so that he may bear witness against all children of men, so that he may relate all the deeds of the generation until the day of judgment," Jubilees 4:24. So Jesus witnesses of himself that the Son of Man will arise at the judgment and condemn this wicked generation. Peter draws his listeners into direct dialogue by suggesting that they themselves are first-hand witnesses to the events that he's describing, attested to you in your midst, right? You yourselves know. These are the things that he's saying about it. In respect to Peter and his audience, possibly also associated the supernatural phenomena of darkness and the moon turning to blood with the events preceding Jesus' crucifixion. That's what I was going to say too. Jesus the Nazarene is a common New Testament designation for Jesus, as also in Talmudic literature. The key verse in Matthew 2:23 that Jesus came and resided in a city called Nazareth, that what was spoken through the prophets may be fulfilled, he shall be called a Nazarene, has traditionally been problematic, given that no particular extant prophet book actually contains such a statement. The fact that Matthew speaks of the prophets in the plural, together with the characteristic midrash play on words, verbal association, and application of the meaning of the one verse to another, both support legitimacy of the allusion. Okay, so it's not saying that he shall be called a Nazarene. It's part of the thing we have to understand. He's not saying he will be called a Nazarene, and we can't find it in the Old Testament. Where's that? It's because he's called the Netzer. Hoter and Netzer. Isaiah 11:1. A shoot will grow off of Jesse's rootstock, a bud will sprout from his roots. This is a messianic prophecy. Netzer and Netzer. That's the word Netzer. A branch, a Netzer. Okay? People thought that a branch of David, Jesse, David's father, a shoot, Hoter, that's another kind of messianic idea, because it's coming of a shoot will spring from the stem of Jesse, a branch A netzer from his roots will bear fruit. And it, just so you know, it's not the Lord will Spirit will rest upon him. The Spirit, yeah. See, delighting the Lord. This is messianic. If you just look at a wolf reside with the lamb, it goes into messianic era stuff too. But the point being, Nazareth was established in the intertestamental period between the Old Testament and New Testament. And why was it established? Because they wanted to secure the descendants of David for the coming of the Messiah. They knew it was coming from David, so they're like, okay, let's make this community in the Galilee called Netzaret. Netzaret. Its literally name is about a messianic branch. So when it says he will be called a Nazarene, that's where a lot of people get this. He will be called a Netzer or someone of the Netzer, etc., etc. So that's just another aside I want to throw in there that he may mention, but he might not. Like I say, it's problematic because there's no particular extant prophet book that actually contains the statement saying he will be called the Nazarene. But that's kind of an interpolation from the New Testament writers of being like, he's going to be called the Netzer, and the Netzer's from Nazareth, and he's from Nazareth, so there you go. It is thus seems quite responsible in this respect to derive the allusion from Isaiah 11:1. Oh my gosh, how did I not see that coming? It makes me feel good that I can actually get to stuff before the author does, but still. Then a shoot will spring from the stem of Jesse, and a branch will shoot from his fruit. Roots will bear fruit. The concept of a branch carries messianic connotations already in the biblical text, especially given in association with the house of David, both Netzer and Semach being interpreted in a messianic context in the simple temple text and onwards. The verse and its motif also appear to lie behind the epithet root of David in Revelation. Matthew's midrashic innovation seems to have been a link to the biblical theme with its own theme with the town of Nazareth, where Jesus came to reside, although the designation Nazarenes probably reflects the biblical motif rather than a geographical location. Even though it's connected to both, it's probably not just talking about geographical, is what it's saying. It is an epithet by which Jesus identified himself to Paul, which Paul himself uses of Jesus, and it occurs quite frequently in the Talmud. It does, because Nazarenes were always known as followers of Jesus. Why? Because they're not just because it's the son of David, the Netzer they're following because Jesus is so associated with this. If the text in Sanhedrin, let's see here, 43a is read teachings instead of disciples, the Talmud witnesses to an early Tanakhic record of early community used of Isaiah 1. When Netzer, identified as Jesus and the 5 disciples on the former reading, was brought in before the court, he said, "Shall Netzer be executed? It is not written, and Netzer shall grow forth out of his roots." Peter's use of the dual designation, men of Israel and men of Judah, may witness to the fact that the 10 northern tribes, which were exiled by Assyria in the 8th century, were not necessarily regarded as being lost, i.e., as not having returned from exile. Genealogical traditions were carefully guarded during the Second Temple period, pure Israelite ancestry needing to be proven in order to be a candidate for an eligible civic office. A woman wishing to marry into a priestly family was required to produce her genealogy for 5 generations back. The sources indicate that even a lay Israelite may know at least the last few generations of his ancestry. Although the greater number of reference are to the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, more isolated claims regarding the 10 or 9.5 lost tribes also occur. Tobit, for example, is designated as being from the tribe of Naphtali. Judith is said to be of the tribe of Simeon, and the prophetess Anna, daughter of Phanuel, of the tribe of Asher. Whether this implies that it was thought during the period that the 12 tribes were unified or whether the lost tribes were still expected to be restored is unclear. Also significant in this regard is the fact that one of Elijah's expected functions as the messianic precursor was that of restoring the tribes of Jacob. Rabbinic literature associates this task with reestablishing the purity of the purity or impurity of Israelite lineages. Elijah was also considered to keep record of familial purity, giving rise to the idea that only families of pure Israelite descent were assured of a share of the world to come. Ooh. Rabbi Haba and Rabbi Hanina said, "When the Holy One, blessed is He, causes His divine presence to rest, it will only upon families of pure birth of Israel. For it is said, at that time, saith the Lord, will I be the God of all families of Israel, not unto all Israel, but unto all families of Israel, as it is said, and they shall be my people. At that time, thy people, everyone who is found written in the book of life, written in the book, shall be delivered. Through whose merit? Our Samuel ben Nahmani said, through the merit of their lineage, for it is said, bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the ends of the earth. Everyone is called by my name." I'd say the merit of Jesus of Nazareth. Okay. Let's do one more verse. / 5 more pages. 23. This man who was handed over by the predetermined plans and foreknowledge of God, you executed by nailing him to the cross at the hands of the Gentiles. At the hands of the Gentiles, even Peter says it, guys. You executed. He's talking to just Jewish people as a people, right? Israel as a people. You did this by basically at the hands of letting him be done by the hands of the Gentiles. Many of Peter's audiences have witnessed Jesus' trial and crucifixion. Pilgrims tending to arrive early for the festival and to stay for some time afterwards. The reference to God's predetermined plan and foreknowledge may signify either God's prior intention to send a redeemer and or the specifics of Jesus' death. The terminology of delivering up is specifically related to the Second Temple period, to handing over Jews to foreign authorities, most significantly the Roman government. It would appear here that the Pharisees, whose absence from the events surrounding Jesus' arrest, trial, and crucifixion is striking, regarded the action taken by the Sadducean high priest as an unforgivable sin, since it was almost certainly meant execution. So here's the thing, people. We like to say that the Jewish authorities did this and Pharisees bad, and that's just the bottom line Christian thing. The Pharisees were not big in the Sanhedrin. They did not have much power. They were actually being kind of whittled out by Sadducees, and Sadducees were more in line with Rome, and they didn't believe in resurrection, and they were more political. They were less religious. They were less adherent to the Torah. They were less all these things. They were more political and Roman in those ways, worldly. We'll just say it that way. The absence of the Pharisees from the judgment, condemnation, execution of Jesus, all these things is telling, like he's saying. Because they saw what the Sanhedrin did as way too far, going way too far. According to the halakha, there is a group of people, Jews and Gentiles, said to them, "Deliver one of yourselves to us, and we shall slay him. If you do not, we shall slay all of you." The ruling is, let all be slain, and do not deliver them a single soul to Israel. But if they single him out, let them deliver him, and them, all of them, not be slain. Deliver him to them, that all of them not be slain. Okay. Let all be slain, and do not deliver them a single soul in Israel. But if they single him out, let them deliver him to them, and all of them not be slain. That kind of sounds like what the high priests were talking about at the time. It's better for one man to die than we lose our temple and lose our nation. The same verdict is reflected in the regulation of the Qumran community, which maintain if a man passes on information against his people or betrays his people to a foreign nation or does evil against his people, you shall hang him on a tree and he will die. On the evidence of 2 witnesses or on the evidence of 3 witnesses, he shall be put to death and they shall hang him on a tree. It sounds kind of familiar, guys. The betrayers are included in the version of the Birkat HaMinim. That's the curse, the benediction against the heretics. That's kind of one of the things we see as a split between Jewish believers in Jesus and Jewish people who did not believe in Jesus. Was they made this curse? It's really a curse. It's a blessing of. They're basically being labeled as informers. Peter's accusation against the Sanhedrin, in his own case. Hold on, wait a second. Yeah. The benediction against the heretics gives in the Tosefta, and their fate, together with that of the Minim, is given as being shut up in Gehinnom, where they are judged for all generations. Oh, wow. Gehinnom is hell. It's what they talk about in this meta. It's really more of a. It's different than we think of hell, but it's what Jesus used. Yeah, Gehinnom. It's a valley outside of Jerusalem where they burn trash, and it has a lot to do with idiomatic expressions. So, like saying, "Oh man, that guy's in hell right now," like he's going through hell in this life right now. What he considers to be it. That's more like it. And the charge of blasphemy against Jesus would appear in this regard to have been sufficiently serious for the high priest to run the risk of being labeled informers. Peter's accusation against the Sanhedrin in his own case is similarly the extremely serious charge of collaboration with the enemy. The term godless men refers to the wicked heathen, and specifically to the Romans. Talmudic literature designates the Roman Empire as a wicked state. Luke denotes the latter agency through the proposition. Yep. Through the hands of. It likewise designates crucifixion, hanging alive, as the practice of the Roman government. Although examples of the use of crucifixion in Jewish history can also be found, some scholars attest that these instances represent death by strangling, a legitimate biblical form of execution. Ooh, interesting. Crucifixion was not only a typical Roman form of punishment, but was also considered to be the gravest and cruelest death. It was originally practiced in the more barbarous age of ancient ancestors, the Romans reserving its use for the punishment of slaves and aliens and for the most heinous crimes. Crucifixion was the only mode of execution the Roman occupying power used in Judea, and the authorities employed it extensively. In Roman practice, the cross was erected by nailing the crossbeam to a stake, the convict being bound to the bars, while staurao became the normal term to describe crucifixion. In the later Christian literature, the common biblical usage is to hang, tala. The Mishnah describes the method of hanging thus. How did we hang these men? They put on a beam in the ground, and a piece of wood jutted from it. The two hands of the body were brought together, and in this fashion it was hanged. Rabbi Jose says the beam was made to lean against the wall, and one hanged the corpse thereupon, as the butchers do. The Mishnaic Hebrew appears to derive from the Hebrew shalav, which connotes the fixing or branches of wooden planks rather than from the Aramaic, blah, blah, blah. The distinction between hanging and crucifying seems to be post-biblical, since the verb occurs only from the Mishnaic period. Since the verb which Luke employs to describe Jesus' crucifixion means to fasten to and to hang, the notation may not reflect the Roman custom of crucifixion by nails, in contrast to the normal practice of binding by ropes. Although a more painful form of execution, the use of nails could also hasten the time of death, since it incurred a loss of blood, not consequence on binding with ropes. The use of nails is known from the several halakhic regulations, since the blood of a living person is pure, while that of a corpse is considered to be impure. The question arose as to the precise time when a crucified man's blood, caused by the wound of the nails, becomes impure, given the exact time of death is not always readily ascertainable. The nail from the cross is also mentioned as being a medical instrument, which, as such, may be carried on Shabbat. Jesus' execution included his arrest and scourging, was carried out by Roman soldiers. To the extent that the latter were ranked and file, they may perhaps have tended towards cruelty and savagery, the higher ranks possibly being more restrained. Despite their tendentious historicity, the Talmudic reports of Jesus include references to his death. Quote, "It was taught, on the eve of Passover, Yesu was hanged. For 40 days before the execution took place, a herald went forth and cried, 'He is going forth to be stoned because he has practiced sorcery and enticed Israel to apostasy. Anyone who can say anything in his favor, let him come forth and plead on his behalf.' But since nothing was brought forward in his favor, he was hanged on the eve of Passover." Ulah retorted, "Do you suppose that he was the one whom a defense could be made? Was he not a enticer, concerning whom Scripture says, 'Neither shall you spare, neither shall you conceal him'?" With Yesu, however, it was different, for he was connected with the government or royalty. This is interesting. Hey, it's all good. Welcome back. We're talking about ideas of crucifixion and kind of being an informer to Rome and all the ways that they used to do it. A second Midrashic tradition also appears to reflect knowledge of Jesus' death. Quote, "The fifth interpretation makes it clear to the Messiah, 'Come hither, approach the royal state, and eat of the bread,' refers to the bread of royalty, and 'dip thy morsel in the vinegar,' refers to his suffering, as it is said, 'But he was wounded because of our transgressions.'" See, guys, they're quoting, I've found so many places in the Talmud and the Mishnah so far where they're quoting Isaiah 53 meaning the Messiah. When any modern day Jewish apologist, non-believing Jewish apologist would say that it's about Israel and it's always been about Israel. It's like, no, there's plenty of people who are saying, as it said, referring to the Messiah in Isaiah 53 as an actual person. "And she sat behind the reapers, for he will be deprived of his sovereignty for a time, as it is said, 'For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken,'" Zechariah 14:2. "And they reached her parched crops," means that he will be restored to his throne. As it said, "He shall smite the land with the rod of his mouth." Rabbi Berechiah said to the name of Rabbi Levi, "The future Redeemer will be like the former Redeemer. Just as the former Redeemer revealed himself, the latter was hidden from them. And how long was he hidden? 3 months, as it is said. And they met Moses and Aaron. To the future Redeemer will be revealed to them, and then be hidden from them. And how long will he be hidden? Rabbi Tanhuma, in the name of the rabbis, said, 45 days, as it is said, and from the time that the continual burnt offering shall be taken away, there shall be 1,298 days. Happy is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,355 and 30 days, whatever it's saying. Daniel, he's talking about a Daniel prophecy. What are these extra days? These are the 40 days during which Israel shall pluck stalwart and eat it. As it is said, they pluck stalwart and wormwood. Let's see. Where will we lead them? From the land of Israel to the wilderness of Judah. As it says, behold, I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness. While some say the wilderness is Sihon and Og, as it is said, blah, blah, blah. He who believes in him will live, and he who does not believe will depart to the Gentile nations, and they will put him to death. Finally, the Holy One, blessed is he, will reveal himself to them, and he will rain down manna upon them. Wherever it is destined to occur in the future redemption will also occur in the first. For the first and second Redeemers, Moses and the Messiah, and the motif of disappearance. Having directly reminded his fellow brethren, his own betrayal of Jesus as well, that delivering someone to the authorities meant his almost certain execution, such that his blood is upon their hands, Peter now places the event within the broader divine context. In the same way as Joseph, as a prototype of the Messiah, understood that God has planned his brother's treachery in selling him into Egypt so that he would be able to save them from famine. Peter's willing to concede that neither the leaders nor the people should be made to bear full responsibility of Jesus' death, a fact which Jesus himself has already acknowledged. To the extent that it was part of God's plan, Jesus' death was bound to happen, and it was orchestrated by God himself. That's where we were going with that whole time, I guess. And yeah, yeah, so interesting. Jesus' references to the prophetic witness is tantalizingly vague. To the prophetic witness is tantalizingly vague. Although the gospel records that he showed his disciples that the Son of Man must suffer things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed and raised up on the third day, a notion which probably eludes the scriptural proof, Jesus does not give chapter and verse. It's because we didn't have chapter and verse back then. It would be oral. What is it called? Well, it's basically like key phrases that attach to other that you'd say that's exact same way as the Old Testament, and you're going, oh, that's where he's at. That's what he's talking about. He does intimate that all scriptures, the law of Moses and all the prophets, and the Psalms, all witness to the Messiah, examples which are brought in the Mysteric tradition. Exactly, Takuya. Like, my God, why have you forsaken me? Psalm 22. I think it's 22. But yeah. Or Genesis. Bereshit, in the beginning, or when the Lord began to create, depending on how you translate it. In the beginning. That's what the book's called. Vayikra, and he said. That's Leviticus. The beginning of the books is what it's called. So you're right, exactly. But it's also another thing where verbal tallies, that's it, where it doesn't have to be the beginning of the book, it just has to be something that's connected to the way it's said. So for instance, when Jesus goes up on the mountain, the gospel writer basically says it the exact same way that it was said when Moses went up on the mountain and began to teach. And so Jesus did this and went up onto the mountain and began to teach. And it's like, oh, we're supposed to think about Moses because it says that exact phrase about Moses. So it's not always about the first part. That's just about naming certain things. That's about, referring when Jesus says that exactly on the cross. He's not talking about the one phrase, my God, why have you forsaken me? He's saying, oh my gosh. Yeah, it depends on that's the beginning of the psalm. Yeah. That's probably what it would say. Exactly. If it's the first thing, then that's probably it. But yeah. Let me see. The servant song passages in Isaiah were a particularly fruitful source for allusions to the Messiah's suffering and death. The teacher of righteousness at Qumran appears to have specifically interpreted many of these texts with respect to his own person. And it's even possible that he was expected to return in the eschaton. Although the tradition concerning the Messiah ben Joseph, or Ephraim, seems to have already existed in the Maccabean era, the elements of his violent death based on Zechariah 12:10 is not indubitably attested before the second half of the 3rd century CE. Okay, we're going to stop there. Oh, academic talk. It took a while to get through all that. Indubitably. It is. Indubitably. Undoubtedly. It's the exact same word, I'm pretty sure, as undoubtedly. Let's have fun with that. Indubitably. Impossible to doubt, yeah. Unquestionable. Indubitably and versus undoubtedly. Let's see what this means. The manner that leaves no possible doubt, whereas undoubtedly means without doubt. In a manner that leaves no not possibility of doubt, undoubtedly. I mean, it's basically the exact same word, but yeah. Indubitably sounds funner, more fun. There you go. Are you going tonight? Indubitably. Indubitably, I'm going this evening to the gathering. I know. Guys, we're 112 pages in. That shows you how fast this book goes because it has so much extra. Can I show you? Do I have my? Is the phone cam working? No, it hadn't been working recently until I do it first. But yeah, it has all these little parentheses, a whole chapter of parenthesis references that I can skip over usually. So we're going to be on 24 through 31 next time. Yeah, well, welcome to English, right? I couldn't find a place where it showed the difference. Undoubtedly or undoubtedly, the difference between these two words is slight and tricky to understand. They are both adverbs and have the root of doubt. Undoubtedly means in a way that can't be doubted. Undoubtedly, on the other hand, means without a doubt. It can't be doubted or just without a doubt. It just, I don't have a doubt versus it's impossible to have a doubt. I guess that's it. Yeah, I don't see the big difference either way. Okay. Whew. Hmm. That might be good for today. That might be good. I don't know if I want to play a game at the moment. I mean, I do, but I don't. Yeah, let's see what we got going on over here then. Just chat. Yay, English! Yeah, let's see what we can do here. Yeah, we'll go raid some super zombies. Let's go raid super zombies. Thanks for coming in, hanging out. Takuya, Mordicus, my other folks. Yay, super zombies. We're ready to raid. Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for coming in. God bless. Have a good day, Takuya. Later's Mordicus. I'll see you on the flip side. Credits rolling. Oh no, credit. I'm gonna go over here. All right. Thanks for coming in there. We're gonna go in 5, 4, 3, 2. Holla.